The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be a world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
Okay, so here we are for the first episode of the Lineups Break Room, wherein we've corralled some of the most essential folks at the WSL, the people who work tirelessly to ensure the world's best surfing happens year over year over year over year, to hear from them on all manner of topics. And with us today, we have treasured marketing coordinator Lindsay Volk, Stoke Master media manager Henry Hendo Bayer, the WSL's incomparable art director Kim Hogan, poetic madman and creative copywriter Daniel Willen, as well as always joined by producer extraordinaire Ryan Fawcett. Everyone, welcome to the break room, and thanks for doing this.
Hello.
You?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to get rolling. So we just finished a marathon 4-event Australian leg for the championship tour, which was a result of the COVID-impacted season. And there's been no shortage of opinions, good, bad, and neutral, on the venues of Newcastle, Narrabeen, Margaret River, and Rottnest Island. So for the first topic of conversation, we want to know how the leg went for each of you, and should these events, in your opinions, return in any fashion in the years to come. So, Lindsay, why don't we start with you?
I thought the leg went great. Thanks for asking. I loved how I think like Surfline said in an article, it was the never ending Australian leg. And I thought that was really funny because it does feel like it's been so long. But when I think about the events, I thought that they were all really good. And I thought that it was special to have 4 Australian events this year. Like you mentioned, we had that because it was the COVID leg, but it's like, that's what makes it interesting, is that every year is different on the tour and you kind of got to keep up with it. And especially to have like that moment all in Australia for like, how long was this? So I thought it was really nice. I don't know if we have to go back to the spots again, but I think that it was really worthwhile to go now.
I think she's got a good point. I wanted to pose this to the group too, of Rottnest specifically. I was talking to somebody who will just leave nameless on one of the crews that has been to Australia many times and had the opinion that like Rottnest didn't provide the best waves. Like it was and I think later in the run, it provided some really good waves, but like earlier, being kind of smaller and maybe not the best waves in Australia. I've never been to Australia, never been to West Oz, but his opinion was that there were way better waves elsewhere in West Oz. So I don't know if others have been to West Oz, have an opinion on like, should we be going back to Rottnest and should we have gone in the first place?
Well, I was lucky to be on the tour for a while in the Nerd Cave, as we call it. Spent a good 6 years. I've been to Margaret River a few times. I've been to Rottnest once, did not surf, didn't even know there was waves there. But watching the event go down, I think it was round 32, and watching Arcal shred the shit out of the waves, I was so jealous. And seeing all of the workers and the athletes and everybody working there riding on bikes, it looked like a beautiful place. But I think it was hard to translate that through the webcast. And when you don't have waves that are to the stars, it's hard to really engage the viewers. I wish I was there for the experience. I would love to go back, but it does also sound like Professor Lenny was also kind of reluctant to have people come back. And I think that we should also respect that as well.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to go back to there specifically, but I did really like having the search back, and I hope that that comes back in the near future, not too far. Just the energy around it is always cool, and going to places that, I mean, I had never heard of Rottnest before we announced that we were going there like a month before the leg started. So just kind of like learning about new places and seeing surfers get out of their comfort zone a little bit is always cool.
I agree with Dan. I think that it's cool to go to new places. I'm less concerned about like the waves being the star, and I'm a little bit more interested in how surfers handle conditions that they've maybe never been in before. Like you said, Hendo, like maybe they've been to Rottnest before. I know that like the girls went on like a sponsor trip there one year, but like to not even know that there's surfing to be had, I think is something that's a really interesting part of the conversation of like, if you're on tour, you should be able to surf at any spot and sort of dominate it, whether you've been there before or not. And so that's kind of how I look at it. So I think it's more interesting if it's sort of framed in that way.
It definitely felt like one of the more like feast or famine venues, because people were saying the waves weren't good, but like sometimes someone would get like a restaurants-esque barrel, which probably felt like really unfair to everyone else in the heat, because they're like, my wave looked like fucking T Street. That's not really fair. But I like, Kim, what you said, I think actually is apropos of the whole leg, which I really loved, because we used to have this event called the Billabong Desert Challenge, which basically took all the most pampered surfers in the world and threw them out into the desert. It was actually in Western Australia, but in Northwestern Australia. And it felt like the whole leg was a version of that because of COVID, because everyone had their entourages stripped back, like people were having to kind of struggle and surf new venues. And I thought it was great. Like I love mixing it up and kind of seeing who can be adaptable and who can't. I just thought it was pretty exciting. But one of the more mega stories that came out of that Australian leg was the ascent of Newcastle rookie and former lineup guest Morgan Cibilic. Third at Newcastle, a fifth at Narrabeen, a second in Rottnest. And as a result, there's kind of no shortage of hype building around the current world number 5, both inside and outside of the WSL building. So questions for the group. Seeing as how we, the WSL, didn't anticipate that Morgan would be a star in 2021, are we pivoting to him moving forward from a marketing and content standpoint? And follow-up question, is that, if we do, kind of too reactive? And what happens if he can't maintain his performance throughout the remainder of the event? So, Dan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised. We made such a big deal all offseason and the start of the year about Jack Robinson and Ethan Ewing. I mean, if I have to hear that Ethan Ewing surfs like Andy Irons one more time, I don't know what I'm going to do. But they just kind of haven't. I mean, they've been okay, but they're sort of on the line for requalification. And I just feel like whether it's reactive or not, like Morgan is super fun. And I don't necessarily know exactly what it is about his surfing that's having him, get these strong finishes, like 3 out of 4 events. But like, when he's in the water, everyone's stoked. The announcers are going crazy. The Australians all seem to love him. And when he gets out of the water, like, I can't wait to see his post-heat interview. I think part of that comes from being friends with Stace, but like, he's just like super entertaining and everything. The more I see of him, the more I like him. So he's in the final 5 right now. If the season ended, he'd be at Trestles. Do I think he's going to end up there? Maybe not, just because I don't think he's ever been to Surf Ranch. But yeah, I mean, he's the biggest story outside of Gabe and Carissa right now for me. So I think why not seize the moment? I think very rarely do we get someone who just comes onto the scene, a total unknown, I mean, at least in my book, and just like blows up like this. So we might as well, kind of run with it.
Dave, you said that we weren't prepared for him to be a star, but I don't know. He was on the lineup before the season started.
Yeah, you made him a star.
So.
Dave.
Yeah, well, I'd love to perpetuate the myth that coming on the show is good for your fucking career, but that was also, Rip Curl made a movie about it, which was really, really funny. Vaughn Blakey did it, and they paid for him to be on our podcast, which was enjoyable. But let's be honest, and Morgan and I would probably laugh about this too. The podcast essentially was him saying, I can't believe I qualified, and me saying, yeah, me neither, for an hour. So it would actually be cool to bring him back on now being like, I can't believe I'm in the top 5. I'm like, yeah, me neither, but how did this happen? So... yeah.
Don't boil it down to just that. People, if you haven't listened to the Morgan Cibilic episode, go back, check it out, give us the download.
That's right.
But I remember you saying when that movie came out, like, it's some of the best surfing I've seen in a long time. And so I at least kind of was expecting to see something from him. Maybe not top 5, definitely not top 5 or final 5 as we call it, but definitely like something. And he showed up. He beat John John twice. He just keeps getting beat by Gabe. He made it to a finals. Like, the dude's showing up. I'm super stoked to see what he does at the Surf Ranch, just because it's like, if you've never surfed that wave before, I feel like it could probably be pretty tricky.
Sure. Well, Lindsay and Kim, you can tell us, are we pivoting to Morgan being sort of central in our marketing and creative now that he's in the top 5?
From my standpoint, no, because we make these little itty bitty videos, and I feel like he's not that explosive of a surfer. Like, we would need like the whole 15 seconds in order to see what he's sort of capable of. So for me, he's like Dan said, more of like a personality guy, which I think leads him into different spaces for us than sort of promotion or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, I'm not saying like Morgan's the reason you're going to tune into the CT, but once you're there, like he might be the reason that you're enjoying the post-heat interviews. And I thought it was interesting, Ryan, when you're like, Dave, you made Morgan a star. I think it's important to remember that like Morgan's been on the Rip Curl team since 2015. And I think that it's important to remember how powerful it is. Like when you get to be on these big brand teams, like that's powerful. And then when that brand sponsors an event, it's like that's the reason why it sort of, fuels itself. It helps Rip Curl that Morgan's doing well, but it helps Morgan that Rip Curl sponsored all of these events. And I wonder what it feels like, when you are a rookie, but you're on the Rip Curl team, you're kind of a hot shot. There's 4 events, and it's the Rip Curl team all around you, the Rip Curl branding. I kind of think you're the guy, and I wonder if that fuels your confidence a little bit in the water.
Do you think it was almost like a home field advantage in some way? His sponsor, his team, his country?
I think a little bit. I think there's always a little bit of home field advantage, but then it's also like, we wonder why we're sort of like attracted to that charisma. And it's like we've been fed the story of him for a while, Obviously there was an entire year where he was on hiatus, but we all knew that he was going to be on tour for a year. And I think that the people who were paying attention knew his name, then Postcards from Morgs came out, and there were just everything sort of fell in line. The controversy after the first event around, was he overscored? I thought that was good. So it's like you keep it up and it builds this puzzle of like, why is he interesting to us? And it's like, he's interesting because we kind of made him interesting.
Ooh. He's interesting because we made him interesting. I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast.
We'll find him at Surf Ranch and we'll say exactly that. And then also like, we can unmake you interesting as well, Morgan. You just fucking wait.
I mean, he makes us interesting too. Like that's the whole thing, It definitely everyone feels each other.
Good cleanup, Linz. Good cleanup.
Go, Hendo.
Kind of bittersweet for me. I'm happy for his success, but I'm kicking myself in the ass for not putting him on my fantasy team for all the events because I'm suffering heavily now. So.
Well, I mean, I actually think the story of Morgan like really encapsulates the thing that I love about the IPS, ASP, WSL, which is that like surfing is largely like a huge hype machine. You have the media and you have your sponsors and they're marketing the shit out of you because of all these sort of subjective qualities. Like you look a certain way or you tick a certain box or whatever it is. And I'm not a competition apologist. That can be improved for sure. But at the end of the day, if you're out there performing, like you can pull yourself up like the profile ladder in a major way. And no one maybe thought Morgan was going to do what he did, but he did, and now he has sort of earned all the attention. Whether or not he can maintain it's another thing, but it's undeniable that he went out there and he belted the shit out of the world's best surfers for 4 events. And now he's number 5, which I think is great. Actually, I think that's sort of the best version of what the WSL can be in a lot of ways.
I'd just say it's great to see some new faces. Like, I mean, the top 3 on both sides have just been dominating so long. So to see a new number 5 is great.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue, Hendo, because we want to flip to the other end of the experience spectrum. And it's been widely reported that everyone is seeing new attitudes and dispositions from world champions like Italo Ferreira and Gabriel Medina this season. Something about how they somehow feel different. So I kind of agree with this, but I'm not sure if I'm crazy or if everyone on the call is also getting the same impression and want to know what you all think. So Kim, what do you think about that? Are Italo and Gabriel giving off a different energy this season from your perspective?
Definitely. I think Gabe is super fascinating for so many reasons, but I think that this year he has like a real lightness to him that I think that he's like mentioned across the board. Like personally, he's gone through some changes for probably better and worse, but he seems really light and free and easy. And that's like not a Gabe we've ever seen before. And I think it makes his surfing like exponentially better, which like nobody knew was possible. But to see him really light and easy is kind of incredible. And then to see him on the podium, like someone was saying earlier, like he's very like fun. fun now, which I think is a really cool side to him that we, again, haven't seen necessarily publicly. And Italo, something has changed too. Like, I don't know exactly what it is for him. Maybe it's something that's a little bit off. But I think we're seeing new sides to everyone.
I for the Gabe portion of that, I go back to a conversation I had with Felipe Marcondes, who we all know internally. He's in Brazil. He's friends with Gabe, and runs a lot of the different stuff down in Brazil. And we were doing a pilot for a podcast that never went anywhere, as some of them don't. But it was a story about Gabriel Medina, and he said, just in particular with Gabe, that the pandemic and COVID hitting and all of that stuff allowed Gabe to kind of take time for himself that he's never really done before. He got the long-term girlfriend that now is his wife. He, settled down in that relationship. He was able to, he had his house that was right off the beach, so he could surf when he wanted to, and more importantly, probably not surf when he wanted to, and just kind of find that happiness a little bit outside of surfing. And so I wonder if that has something to do with kind of his mental space now when he's back on the tour and he's just kind of in a happier place, and he found all of these things because he was able to take a year off,
I think for sure, yeah. Especially, you see him at Margaret River, going to the wineries, enjoying life, and really going on tour. A lot of times people go on tour and they're so focused on winning heats and advancing that I'm not a pro surfer by any means, but I can imagine that stress builds up. So for him to go on the road with his partner and actually take advantage of these beautiful destinations that they go to outside of the waves, it looks like he's having a great time. And I love the new Gabriel 2.0. Love it.
So I kind of have two different conflicting thoughts on this. The first is that, yes, I love it. Happy Gabe. Who knew that the best surfer in the world could get even better? And you just see it, there's a spontaneity. There always kind of is, but it's just at a new level. It's crazy. But from a fan's perspective, I kind of miss Mean Gabe. I love having
100%,
villains. There's
100%.
not that many true villains on tour. I don't know if there's a single villain on tour. And Gabe wasn't really a villain, because he's dominating, but he was very cutthroat and, the intentional interferences, the just blood in the water shark coming after you, pure intimidation. I love that. And I just feel like there's a hole on tour of villains or people who take it that seriously. And I'm all for him being happy, fully into it. His surfing's great. If he wins the world title, even awesome. But we need someone to assume that role, and I don't know if there's anyone on tour that can do it.
I feel like he's still that guy, but now he just does it while he's fucking smiling, which is almost more lethal.
That's true.
He'll still interfere with Kaio at pipe, but he laughs after maybe, and I feel like that's even worse.
I think it's all there's also kind of, we're all American people, right? There's also kind of a version of perspective, and having had the privilege of being on tour for as long as well before Gabriel came on tour, he really kind of was positioned, as you put it, Dan, as sort of the villain or the black hat very early on as a foil to everyone else. And it wouldn't surprise me if there was sort of unintended or subconscious kind of racial undertones to that framing as well. But I remember reading something that at the time, especially when he was ascendant and kind of winning his first world title, about U.S. occupation in the Middle East, and journalists were talking to the people that were there that were fighting the Americans and saying well, what's your favorite movie? And they were saying Star Wars, and they go, oh, really? That's surprising. And they said, what do you mean? We're the rebels, you guys are the empire. And it really kind of arrested this journalist in the sense of he's the villain to a largely westernized culture, but in Brazil, he's, Luke Skywalker, right? We're the empire, Kelly's Darth Vader kind of thing, and I that's always stuck with me because I think there's a perspective thing. But to Kim's point, now that he is completely comfortable being who he is as a competitor and smiling as he's doing it, I just think he seems really, really unbeatable to me. Lindsay, what's been your perspective from the marketing seat?
Yeah, I'm with Kim. I think it's better than ever. I think he's still that guy because he has that edge. And I really liked after Rottnest when he talked about how his wife had thought that the trophy was so beautiful, so he was so happy that he was able to win it for her. I thought it was so perfect and summed it up, because it's like he was still after the trophy, just for different reasons, and that reason was a lot more interesting to me.
I don't know. I think you can have that, but he still needs to have an edge. Like, I get what Dan is saying. Like, from a fan's point of view, everybody here knows I'm a huge basketball fan, huge Oklahoma City Thunder fan, huge Russell Westbrook fan. Russell has this edge, and when he's on your team and he like is going 150 miles an hour on the court, and he's just like no regard for anybody, nobody's his friend except for the basketball. When he's on your team, you love that. When he's on another team, you don't love that as much, because you're a little bit polarized by him. And I think you want that from someone in surfing too, of Gabe, of like, he's Brazil's hero. We might see him as like a little bit of a villain or whatever. Maybe he's a villain, maybe he's not, but he's got that edge that no one else really on tour has. And I do think we're missing that edge. I think we're missing someone that brings that.
The tour might be missing it, but I think from Gabriel's perspective in terms of success, like, this is the best start he's ever had in his career. Years he's won the world title, years he hasn't. And I, as a sort of unaccredited sort of neutral observer of professional surfing, I've never seen him be so dominant, like competitively or performance-wise. I think the rest of the tour is in a lot of trouble. Switching gears a little bit, and in, I suppose, on the topic, which Lindsay touched on, which is having something more than just yourself to compete for. What about Tyler Wright? She had a huge year in 2020 that blended, her personal life and her professional life. She won the Pipe Masters at the end of 2020, but she's struggled a little bit during the Australian leg. Hendo, what have been your observations on Tyler Wright so far, and what do you kind of forecast for her before the season's finished?
I feel like she had a good showing at Newcastle. I was really impressed with her forehand, and that off the rocks, she was surfing really well. And then for some reason, it started declining. And by the end, towards Rottnest, in her last heat, I just remember in my mind seeing a clip of like 6 wipeouts in a row, and she had a total shocker, which is the definition of a shocker straight up. Like, I was not expecting that. So yeah, it just begs the question if she's fully healthy still, or if what her motivations are, if she's stoked to be there. I mean, she was surfing great, and especially seeing her start the year off in Hawaii was also great. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't really figure it out. I mean, we'll see how she does at Surf Ranch.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, for perspective, like, she's still 4th in the rankings. So like, she's still going to be in the final 5 most likely. But for her standards, it does feel like a little off, and I don't really know what the deal is, but it's almost like she ran out of gas by the end of the leg. I mean, it was exhausting and pretty nonstop, and she hasn't surfed. I mean, no one surfed that much in 2 months in a long time, but she definitely hasn't surfed that much. So I don't know what it is, but I'm curious to see how she does at Surf Ranch, and then how she does at at Chopu and stuff. I think she won Pipe, so I'd imagine she'd be one of the favorites there. But yeah, that last heat at Rottnest was a little funky. You're just like, whoa, what's going on here?
I was going to say, I'd like to give a shout out just to Tyler, still rocking the Black Lives Matters board. I think, everybody knows where this podcast stands on those types of issues. We've made it very clear. But she came on this podcast and said, like, hey, I realize that I have more of a platform now, and I want to start standing up for that. I don't know if that has any impact on her performance. I don't know if she's, now that she's into a lot more things outside of the water that probably feel a lot more important. I don't know if that has any impact on her mental state. But because I still think she can obviously surf at such a high level in my eyes, next to Carissa, the best female surfer in the world. So, I hope we see her come back even stronger at places like Surf Ranch and in Mexico. I do wonder though, does the other stuff have any impact on her emotionally and therefore translate into the water? I mean, I don't know.
I'm surprised that Black Lives Matter board's still in like competitive condition. That's a long time for like a world-class surfer to keep a board like that. Like, I mean, she rocked that back in September or whatever it was, that's impressive.
I think there's something that happens when you now there's an expectation on her to not just surf really well, but also be someone who like makes a statement about something every time and stands up for this thing and uses her voice in this other way. And so I wonder if there isn't the sort of caving of the pressure to more than just one expectation of her, which is something if you're a person who decides that you want to be sort of intersectional in some way, not saying that's always a choice, but like when you decide that you want to stand up for something, there's that added expectation that maybe you'll stand up for that thing every time. You'll keep using your voice and using your voice. And I think that that can be just as exhausting as the physical toll of your sport or of the emotional toll of competition, that expectation to be this, sort of freedom fighter type of person.
Pretty similar to that. When it comes down to it, Gabe, Tyler, whatever's going on with them outside of the water definitely affects their performance because they're just people. So when you say, does this have an impact on her surfing? I'd say it has to, whether good or bad. When you have anything going on, it's going to sort of have an impact on you just because you're human too.
All right, we are going to take a quick break for commercials, and when we come back, we'll have a few more topics. So the next topic is all of the performances this season are leading up to, for the first time ever, a spot for the WSL Final Five and a chance to contend for the world title at the Rip Curl WSL Finals this September. To that end, we actually have a tie on the current WSL women's rankings with France's Joanne Defay and Australia's Stephanie Gilmore currently matched at the number 5 spot. And on the topic of ties, I want to know, how do we feel about this and ties in general in kind of all sports? Lindsay, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Like, how does anyone feel about ties? And I feel like in general, people think that ties suck in the sporting world. Like, ties are worthless, etc. So, I mean, it jumped out at me when I saw that there was a tie in the rankings. I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to be talking about it. But then, had work the next day and no one was. And so that's where I'm wondering, like, do we not care about ties in surfing? And is that because they don't matter as much? And part of me wonders why that would be. Like, if maybe it's because we're so global, because as we look at sort of the sports landscape, there's been so much conversation in the sports industry about ties in soccer and how maybe that's one of the reasons it doesn't resonate in the US as well. Or if you look at the infrastructure changes that the NFL has made around ties, trying to make sure that they don't happen. I was just curious, what does it mean when people have a tie with our points, and what does that mean looking to the finals? And maybe it means nothing at all, but I wonder if, like, the surfers themselves, are they registering it? Do you think it kind of shakes them up a little bit?
I fucking hate ties.
Hate them.
I am a tie, anti-tire. I don't like ties. Somebody should win. And I guess the question I have, Dave, is how do we decide? Like, let's say we were going into trestles and Steph and Joanne are tied. Like, how do we decide who surfs on that day?
Yeah, so
surf off.
I would love a surf off. But before you get to that point, it's actually outlined in the rule book because we've had to deal with this in terms of qualification for a number of years. So there have been instances where people have tied. And what we do now, if we're going to have 8 events in the 2021 Championship Tour season, the surfers are ranked based off of their best 6 results of those 8 events. So if there maintains a tie at one of those positions for the final 5, then the tiebreak will go to, okay, who had the best ranking based off their best 5 of 8 results. And if it's still tied, you go best 4, and then so on until the single result, who had the highest single result. And if none of that breaks the tie, then we do go to a surf off, which everyone loves except for the surfers involved, I think.
Shouldn't it be who has the best 7? If after that, like after 6, if you're tied, shouldn't it be like, okay, well then who has the best 7th? Like, who did better for more of the year than who did more elite for 5?
That's a good question. I probably actually fucked the answer up. It might actually be that. I don't know.
I'm sure you're right. I think I just disagree
I'm not actually
with the
sure.
rule.
Right. I just was like, well, I could keep going this way. I'm not sure. It's a good point. Like, and I say all that not being super familiar with it, but I imagine that each version of that's been wrestled with, and kind of whatever the surfer technical committee thinks is more fair, they kind of go to that. Maybe they do go to best 8 or best 7 and best 8. It's a good question.
staking my claim in for best 7 if there's a tie.
We can do like a fact check at the end of the episode to be like, Dave is wrong about these 5 things.
Just do a voiceover. I mean, I agree. The only tie I like is maybe a bolo tie. Those are always a good time when you're wearing one. But otherwise, like, I just want a resolution. My mind goes crazy and I wonder what's going to happen, who's going to win. So when I think about it, like looking back on the Oz League, there was actually a lot of ties and a lot of heat totals. And I just had so many questions like how it got to that point. But now, especially with 2, Steph and Joanne tied in the rankings, I'm sure it'll sort itself out as we do more events. But yeah, I mean, I would love some clarity.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like now that we're moving towards this new final system where like you have to win in the water, you have to actually beat someone to win, and it's not a numbers game. Like all aspects of ties should just somehow go away. Like I know that part of it is built in because like 2 people finish 3rd and a bunch of people 5th and then a bunch of people 9th. You know, like they get the same number of points. But I almost feel like we should find a way to have a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, you know, for each event. I don't know how that works, but now that we're deciding everything in the water, everything should be decided in the water. Like we should have surf offs for everything. Just leave Mikey right out of it.
Off of what you said, Hendo, around like, you know, we need more clarity around what it means, etc. That's what I was sort of wondering. I was like, maybe no one cares about the tie because no one gets it. And I think that's sort of funny that like people are comfortable only like surface level understanding, you know what I mean? Because like I'm not expecting people to break open the rule book, but to Dave's point, like these things are available, like you can check them out, like understand what happens when X happens. And it's just funny to me, sort of like the passiveness around not getting heated when there's a tie, when in some other sports, if you're a huge Stephanie Gilmore fan and, you know, she's tied and that being tied at 5th might mean that she's not in the final 5 at the end. It could be like, you know, it's an interesting thing that I felt like no one was talking about.
I think you're speaking to something that I've been thinking about recently, Lindsay, in a larger aspect of just how complicated this sport is and how large the barrier of entry can be. Because my brother visited, he's from Kansas, and he brought him and his girlfriend out to LA, stayed with me for the weekend. And I think it was Margaret River was on, or Rottnest, one or the other. And I put it on and she was like, okay, so are there always 3 people in the water? And I was like, well, no, just for this round, it's called the seeding round. And then it's going to go to an elimination round, but only the 3rd person. And then there's 2 people after. And it's like, I sat there for 20 minutes trying to explain to her the sport of surfing. And it was insanely hard, and I'm pretty sure she didn't understand any of it, and she probably won't watch surfing because she's like, I don't really get it. I don't know what's. And then there's the whole subjectiveness part of it, like it's a subjective sport, so it's a subjective scoring scale. I just think I don't know. That made me think of just the reality of how big the barrier to entry could be for this sport.
I was going to say, I guess, like, I agree to our listeners out there in Kansas or someone who might not understand the sport. Is like so complex, and then you add in overlapping heats, and then you add in, you know, people don't really understand the oceans and the tides and the winds and all that. Is so complicated. So I think that's been a challenge, I feel like, throughout the career of professional surfing, is to try to explain that to people who might not A, have the time to understand it, and B, like not really care like as much as we do. Like I love all that stuff. I grew up my whole life watching it, and for someone who doesn't understand it, I'm sure it's hard for them to like even grasp it.
It is tricky. I think there's a tension, and I think some of the stuff that we're designing for in 22 and beyond gets to some of the clarity of understanding of like how we determine who the best surfers are, and how the schedule works, and how the formats work, and how we crown world champions. But I also think the other side of it is a lot of the stuff that has been deemed kind of impenetrable has kind of been done out of necessity because they're having to overcorrect for how dynamic the field of play is, right? And some of those sort of formatting decisions or scheduling decisions or rule decisions or judging decisions maybe were unnecessary, but I think a lot of them contributed to conditions where we actually are seeing the world's best surfing happening in these events. Now, the way that we deliver that to the fans, both core and kind of uninitiated, can improve for sure, but that's a huge departure from even when I started like 15 years ago, where we always said it was world's best surfers, world's best waves. But a lot of times the surfing happening outside of competitions could be argued as being better. That's no longer the case. Like the surfing happening in the live arena is the best surfing anyone will ever see every year. And that's pretty huge. I think the package can get improved upon though, for sure.
Yeah. It's good to be able to hang your hat on, be able to say like, this is the best surfing you're going to see, period.
Well, if not, we can all go home. That's kind of our deal. Well, as we do with every episode, we put feelers out to the Instagram community to see if our listeners had any questions for our break room. And this might have been the most responses we've ever gotten to this. I think people have a lot of questions for what happens behind the curtain here. But Kim, why don't you kick us off with the first question?
Sure. Apologies in advance for definitely mispronouncing your handle. But David Bielfis asks, is there a rivalry with Stab, or is it viewed as good for the brand to have an antagonist?
It's an interesting question. So I work in marketing. For me, there's no rivalry with Stab. I mean, they cover us. They're a media outlet who covers surfing, so they naturally cover the best in the world. But it's not like I'm going on my day-to-day job writing promos or emails saying, oh, I wonder what Stab's going to think about this, or oh, I'm going to throw this clip in there and see how Stab reacts. I don't really think about it at all during my day-to-day life. I enjoy what they write. Although I do think, there's an aspect that's any press is good press. And I do believe that. The more people are talking about pro surfing, the better for us and for me personally. But I read a lot of sports media, and I have seldom seen a media outlet cover the sport that they love and specifically cover so negatively, I guess is the word. I feel like there's a way to have fun with it, like you see Deadspin, stuff like that. I'm not saying that there's no place for criticism in sports. I mean, it's everywhere, but it does feel like I think the question comes from the fact that most coverage WSL gets from Stab is negative, and that's why people on Instagram are like, oh, there's a rivalry, like how are you responding, and like are asking us as employees whether it like plays into our day-to-day jobs. I don't think that's normal for most sports, but I mean, like I said, any press is good press.
I just like the like, it's like from the Men. You ever watch Mad Men, where he's like, two people get in the elevator and one's like, I feel really, really bad for you. And then Don Draper's like, really? Because I don't think about you at all. I feel like that's what you just said about staff. You're like, I don't ever think about them.
I mean, I don't never think about them. I like watching the electric acid surfboard test. But like I it doesn't affect my day-to-day in any way. I'm not sure how many people that it does affect inside the building in their day-to-day jobs.
Every day for me.
Except for Dave.
Yeah.
Okay, from Andy Cashford. Kim, what is the biggest misconception about working for the WSL?
I think the biggest misconception about working for the WSL is that we are not just like people with desk jobs, which is entirely what we are. It seems like there's an idea that we are also like surfers on tour. Like in order to work here, you must be like an excellent surfer and have like been everywhere in the world surfing. And that's just like not the case at all. We are people who work at a company, and we're humans with lives. And that's who we are. WSL employees.
I vividly recall before the acquisition, like the angry masses like bitching about this is a stupid sport run by surfers and you need professionals, and these same angry masses now bitching that it's not all professional surfers that work at the company. Like it's just kind of I think we just need a balance of both. Like and as you put it out, like human beings.
At Natan_day, sorry if I blew that, my friend, asks, how do you choose your guests? And I assume this is for the lineup. So Ryan, you got something? Dave, Ryan?
Yeah, I can answer this one. So we choose our guests with this group plus a couple other people. We have a group of people that work at the company, and we have obviously the tour dates on the schedule. We've got different things we want to hit on the schedule, like Olympics or maybe something that our marketing department is trying to hit. And we mix all of those kind of key objectives with the people that we just want to talk to. So it kind of starts with like, who does Dave want to talk to? Who do we as a group want Dave to talk to? And then we go from there and try and schedule it in different slots that make sense, right? So obviously we want to talk to some of the CT surfers, but we might want to save Carissa for whenever she's getting ready to get into a Final Five, right? Because she's obviously going to be part of that group. So might save her for later in the year and talk to some other people. We talked to Randy Rarick right when we were around the sunset window, when we were supposed to be at sunset. So those are kind of the pacings that we're trying to keep. And really, honestly, we get suggestions from the community as well. So if you're writing in on Instagram, we're seeing those messages. We're putting those in the bucket that we're pulling from. And so, yeah, if you've got any suggestions of people that should be on, feel free to write in at the Lineup Pod. We look at those messages and respond to all of them as much as possible. But yeah, small group that decides who we're going to talk to, and it really starts with who do we want Dave to really dig in deep with.
Cool. I think that I can jump in next. We have another hard-hitting question from Rafaela Spontes. Definitely messing up the name. But they ask, what is it like working for the WSL? How does one get that opportunity?
So I'll go ahead and answer this, Rafaela. Thanks for the question. I feel like I'm maybe in a different department than everybody here. I am freelance, so I'm kind of like a wild card of the events for the last 6 years, whereas everyone here is on the CT and is qualified. And I would ask probably the same question. How do I get in the door and do that? But the way that I kind of got to where I am today was with production. It was I would say it was a 10-year long road working for various other production companies and starting off in Hollywood being like, I don't want to be working for a company doing the world's wildest police chases and whatnot. So I decided to work with surfing, put my head down, applied to every single production company that did action sports out there, and got a call from one, and it all led me to here. So I too have the same question. If you guys here could answer, like, how do I go further and how do I get in there?
I mean, I responded to a LinkedIn ad, if I'm being completely honest.
Same.
I found a LinkedIn post I work in audio and music, and applied for it and interviewed a few times, and that's how I got this job.
LinkedIn didn't even exist when I started working in music.
How'd you
Dave
get
wrote
your
a
job,
letter
Dave?
and mailed it in.
Dave wrote a letter for
Snail mail.
unpaid internship for
I
Dave.
did. Yeah. Well, it still exists. It's actually Malachi.com. It's like an action sports version of like Monster for jobs. And there was a telecommute unpaid internship for the ASP. And I'm like, oh, so look good on the resume. I took that.
All right. Next question comes from Jenna Jesse, who asks, and I'm going to pitch this one to you, Dave. Why is there a stigma around helmets? Is the risk really worth the quote unquote looking cool factor?
It's a really good question. And I think, this really came up quite a lot with Owen Wright's kind of well-publicized brain injury that he suffered out at Pipeline. And Owen, even recently, especially in the last couple of years, he's been wearing a helmet when conditions are really serious. And he's been speaking out a lot about it as well, trying to erase the stigma around wearing helmets. And I think it's going to be more of a conversation in surfing moving forward. Even outside of like really, really heavy conditions at somewhere like Pipeline or Chopu or Mainbreak or the Box, it wouldn't surprise me if studies came out that sort of highlighted the propensity of microconcussions just in terms of like everyday surfing and what that can lead up to for people, because I do think it's something that people are going to be talking about a lot more. And I think the more people talk about it, the less people will have a stigma around it. And I think, someone like Owen Wright, who is a longtime world title contender, intentionally and deliberately trying to destigmatize it's going to help as well.
And I would also say, quick shout out, the Swellians have done a great job of flipping that script and making the Gath cool. I really respect it that they twisted it in a way that's like Gath, and like people are stoked to wear it, and they're like praising Jeremy Flores and Owen Wright for wearing these Gaths, which I do think kids nowadays surfing, charging heavy pipe, like should be wearing helmets for sure.
I'm not gonna lie, when I see Jeremy and Owen put the helmet on at like Jopo or something, like, oh shit, here we fucking go. Like it's gonna be gnarly. I get pretty stoked. I don't know who's still being like, oh my god, that guy's wearing a helmet, get him out of here.
No, it just furthers the
Yeah,
fight.
you're
It's
like, oh, boy.
here we go.
All right, I think I'm up next. BZip 023 asks, what do you miss most about being in the office? The snacks or the snacks or the snacks? Lindsay?
I miss Brendan Zipfel in the office.
Shout out to BZip for this question.
Yeah, we all miss Beezy.
Honestly, I don't miss the snacks at all. I haven't thought about them since we've been gone. But contrary to popular belief, there are cool people who work at WSL. And so I miss that. You know, when it's all remote, there are certain departments that I work really closely with, but then there are others that I don't work as closely with, and you don't bump into them when you're not, you know, in person. So I miss that, and that's fun. And I'm excited to sort of start re-entering that.
It is funny how like the snack and beverage selections change with the different administrative regimes, you know, or like, oh, it's all like Corona kegs and like, you know, your body weight and Skittles. And then the next week it's like, it's kombucha and, you know, like oat bars. And you're like, all right, it's good. So those are the questions from the Instagram community. Thanks to everyone. If you don't follow us already, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the Lineup Pod. And as Ryan highlighted, we try to answer every single one of our comments and questions. Final segment for the maiden episode of The Break Room is Unpopular Opinion. And to kick us off for Unpopular Opinion, we have Dan Willen. So Dan Willen, what is your unpopular opinion to close out our show?
I have a question, and maybe an unpopular question. And it is, after his latest injury, is John John done? Like, is he going to come back? I mean, I know we're seeing a lot of Instagram posts about coming for the Olympics, but how many more times can he have a major injury and want to come back versus just going out on a sailboat?
I think he can have one more major injury and want to come back. And I think he will have that injury. I think that he's not going to be part of the Olympics. And I just think it looked like too bad of an injury. I don't know anything. Dave knows probably more than I do. He's kind of close to John John, but I don't know anything. And I think he's not going to make the Olympics. And I think he'll probably end up trying to come back in 2 bad knees, just injury ridden, get hurt again. And then we're going to see, just like Andrew Luck, Brandon Roy of surfing, just so much promise, 2 world titles, but maybe the best ever could have been like, or second best ever next to Kelly, but like couldn't put it together because of injuries.
This is a really good unpopular opinion because I feel like everyone's going to be in our DMs just hating all over it because no one wants to see him go away.
I don't want to see him go away.
No. But I mean, even asking the question is almost speaking it into the universe. I had lunch with him the other day, and I'll say a couple things. He's gotten a lot of major injuries in his surfing career. The year that he qualified, he actually broke his back out at Pipeline. He's blown out his one knee twice, and then recently blew out the other knee. He is really goddamn tough, and he surfs really, really hard. I mean, he didn't say anything. We didn't talk about this at all, so I can't kind of give you any insight. But I would imagine he's going to work really hard to come back for the Olympics and come back to the CT. But it's an interesting question, right? Because he admittedly hates being injured, and he's really, really frustrated being injured. And the Andrew Luck question is interesting because Andrew Luck basically left because he was sick of living his life being injured, you know? So I'd be surprised if he left surfing, but what would happen if he toned it down so he wasn't so like risk heavy on getting injured? Is that how he wants to surf? Is that how we want to see him surf? I don't know.
What's the injury? What is his current injury? Did he say?
I'm sure he said somewhere. All the knee injuries just sort of blend together for me. Because
I mean, if he like tore an ACL versus, you know, just a contusion of some type, like those are totally different.
He had surgery on the knee, and so he's been rehabilitating here in California.
I mean, the Olympics are in like a month and a half.
Yeah,
right?
it's going to be tough.
I don't think he's done. I mean, from what we've seen with his injuries in the past, he's actually pretty good at rehabbing. And the fact that he got on a plane right away, went straight to get surgery, posted the next day, hey, things are looking pretty good. He made a whole film dedicated to Tokyo Rising about the Olympics. And like he dedicated getting better so that he could jump that spot. And unfortunately, like jumps later, make sure he's in there. And like he's spent so much time focusing on doing the Olympics. And I think for these athletes, it's such a big deal that I think he's not done. I think he'll be at the Olympics. And I'm going to be cheering him on with all my heart.
It's one thing.
Me too.
It's one thing to want to be in the Olympics, but like if you physically can't perform, it's like less than 8 weeks away, the Olympics.
Well, the other thing is like his comeback at pipe was freaking amazing. And hey, I wanted to be at the Olympics. I want to be back next event.
Same.
I want to be at Surf Ranch, but it's not going to happen.
100%.
But like at pipe, you know, for someone who grew up right next to it, it was kind of like he drops in, he sets his line and he goes, and his knee didn't take, I mean, it took a beating, but not. In Japan, he's going to have to be like doing a lot more than setting the line and going straight. Not to say that he can't, but I just feel like it's going to be so much more taxing on his knee.
It's a funny one, right? Where it's like for him, it's safer for him to re-enter competitive surfing at 10-foot pipeline than 1-foot Chiba.
Yeah, exactly.
It's true, though.
It's true, yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens with John moving forward. We'll see what happens with this podcast moving forward. But this has been a lot of fun, guys. I think we should be doing the break room every week, but we'll probably stick to once a month for starters until we can pay for all your talents more often. But this was great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Thanks
for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.